Hi everyone, it is Tasman, Director at Kacha, and today I have with me the exceptional Liz Jones.
Hi Taz, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Good.
Now Liz is the Associate Director of Strategic Relationships with Dattner Group. And Liz comes from an established and esteemed career, 25 years in human resources and recruitment. Liz, tell us a bit about the kind of work that you do.
So Taz, the kind of work that I really do now is to help people navigate career. So I tend to work a lot with people that are going through a change. It might be that I've got to a point in my career where I really want to do something different now. It's no longer fulfilling me the work that I have been doing, or I might be at a stage in my career where I'm thinking I want to elevate, get up to that next level and start progressing my career. For some people, it can be as a result of imposed change, like redundancy, restructure, those sorts of things as well. So helping to really map out that journey and what that might look like.
Fantastic, great. Now that sort of a move in anyone's life is an emotional experience, and you've done a lot of work in this space, so tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the real keys to handling change successfully, as far as I've observed with people I've worked with. So we know that with change, there's two kinds. There's change that you have control over. So I'm making a decision to go out into the market and to get a new job. I'm making a decision to go for a promotion. Yep. The other kind of change that we experience is change that's imposed on us. And often that's things like redundancy, but we know it can also be things that affect us, like our colleagues moving on into a new role or a new company. It can be things obviously like we've experienced with COVID, where those things are really out of our control. But we know that with all of these kinds of changes, we're going to experience grief. And the grief that we experience is just the same as any other kind of grief. It's just with the job market and with our career, we often don't acknowledge grief. And we don't give it the time that we need to process the emotions.
Yeah, I think that's such a fascinating lens. You know, there's all this conversation about the Great Resignation, and I don't think I've come by at all anyone talking about the emotional experience for those who might be left behind when their work family changes dramatically. Absolutely. Or when the organisation subsequently restructures and the role becomes different. So tell us a bit about the process of moving through grief and change.
So there was a fantastic researcher who many of your followers might have heard of, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She dedicated her career to studying grief and dying, which was quite remarkable, some of the things that she uncovered. One of the things she did do, though, is develop a curve of emotions, a change curve. And there are a number of different points on that curve that she identifies that we all experience to lesser or greater degrees. Really important to understand with these emotions, so it's not a linear process that we go through. For some people it can be, but for other people, grief can be something where you take one step forward and two steps back. And that might happen before lunch for some people. For other people, it might take months to go through that process. Absolutely. What we know is that by identifying our emotions and being able to understand where our decision making, where our responses and our reactions are coming from, we're more likely to be able to treat those symptoms of grief with kindness and to move through the process faster.
Great, yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So, well, look, talk us through. Tell us a little about this process.
So initially, Kubler-Ross says that we all experience shock.
Yeah.
We all are familiar with that feeling. It's when our emotions take over, our hormones take over, the chemicals in our brain are going crazy, and we just go into that flight or fight mode. So some of the things I've seen that people do in this mode is make some really critical decisions that they go on to regret later. So it might be, I've just lost my job, I'm going to tell my boss what I think about him now.
Totally.
You know, it might be, I'm going to just suddenly become really angry. It might be, I lose my voice and I can't tell people what I feel and what I think in this moment. That's something that we all go through to a lesser or greater extent.
You know, it's fascinating on that, if I might. I often speak with people who are going through the initial shock from someone leaving the organisation, especially a direct manager or a senior leader.
Absolutely.
And the reaction is, oh, something's happening here. I need to do something. Things are going to change. It's scary.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's often too when we see people that decide to make a move very suddenly. So my manager, my team have left. I'm out of here.
Absolutely.
Whereas in fact, it might not be the best decision, but they're responding purely from shock.
Absolutely.
The other thing that I experienced, and you've probably got similar stories to this too, Taz, when I was in recruitment, that's where we would see a lot of people that would just blast their resume out to the entire market. And quite often there'd be typos, or they wouldn't be able to articulate what they wanted to do next.
Yeah.
But they felt like they were doing something to take control back.
Definitely first-hand experience of that
Yeah,
one.
yeah. The next stage that we see after shock is denial. So in the case of a restructure, that can often be people bargaining. You know, I'll do something different, or I'll do anything to stay at this company, even though prior to that they might have really enjoyed their time at that company. Yeah. It might be people going out into market and applying for jobs that they're not really that engaged with, just for the sake of getting a job. So in that denial phase, what we're really trying to do is disrupt our thinking. So has my job changed because now I have to work from home all the time, and I'm not around my team, and I am not doing the same sort of work that I was doing prior to COVID. But that's my problem. It's not the fact that the job's changed, something about me has changed. So they're quite common responses. From denial, people usually move into a stage of frustration. So this is where, okay, I recognise that this change is happening, things are different, and they're never going to be the same again. So a response to that is, I'm going to get really angry about that. I'm really frustrated because it's out of my control. There's nothing that I can do at this point.
I've had many conversations with candidates that are venting a particular experience that's happened, a change that's happened that they're not happy with, and it is definitely a state of frustration.
Absolutely. And at this time, you do have to be quite in tune with your emotions. And when you're having those conversations, where are those conversations coming from? And what impact are they going to have on future opportunities and on your brand? That can often lead into depression. So that's the next phase on that grief curve. Now, for some people, depression can be really serious, and it can spiral into a quite significant bout of depression. For a lot of other people, it's not that severe. It can just be low moods, a sense of fatigue, a sense of exhaustion. But again, recognizing that's a part of that grief curve that we're all going through, being conscious of thinking, what's the effect for me when I go out to market now and have an interview? If I find myself in this phase, maybe I shouldn't be ringing up and talking to recruiters this week if I feel a bit flat. Maybe I should just be a bit kinder to myself.
That's a fascinating. I actually had someone very recently who had several interviews go unsuccessfully, and they were actually coming out of a redundancy. And when I spoke to them, their state and their tonality was so flat, and it was like, this person's going to be really for an uphill battle. And I remember giving this person a bit of feedback around how to manage that as they went into interview, but with none of the subtle nuance that you're talking to here. Very real experience for many people.
Absolutely. And that's not to say that you can not have those emotions. You have to recognize those emotions, but recognizing I'm experiencing this emotion, so I need to modify what's going on in my environment. You know, after depression, we often find that people enter a phase of experimentation. So they've now recognized the change, they've dealt with the emotions of that change. So now they're wanting to start to experiment with what the new might look like. This is often when people will go out to market, they'll be meeting with recruiters. And you'll remember I said this isn't a linear process. So at this point, we often see people go into market, start to have interviews, start to put their resume out there, and guess what? They don't hear back from anybody.
Absolutely. Very common experience.
Absolutely. Or they go to an interview and they don't get any feedback about their interview.
Absolutely.
So that experimentation very quickly turns from something quite optimistic to sliding back into that depression phase and feeling really bad and having a bit of self-blame around that. Again, it's not to say that you shouldn't feel the emotion, but recognise where that's coming from.
Absolutely, yeah. And look, it's so interesting because people can sometimes in that place begin to interpret the rejection and the way that they feel as a judgment or indictment on who they are as a person, a job seeker.
That's right.
And then the momentum for the whole experience just sort of comes to a stop.
Yeah. And it's actually not the case. No. But that is absolutely where people get stuck. And it does take a lot of confidence and resilience to bring yourself out of that, you know. The next one is around the decision. So we've done our experimentation now. So I might have been in market and had a series of job interviews, for example, in the minerals and mining sector, because I'm thinking that's where I really want to go. Interestingly, I've had 5 interviews and I just haven't felt the love at any of those interviews. It doesn't feel like the right fit. I'm not having much success in market. So at that point, I might sit back and go, you know what? This actually isn't the right direction for me. In fact, where I need to be going is in healthcare. And so at the end of that experimentation phase, we get to a decision-making point where we're saying, okay, I'm ready with this change. I'm comfortable to make the step. I'm directing myself, and this is what I'm going to do. So quite often in that decision phase, this is where we're negotiating salaries, where we're signing off on deals, where we're looking at our conditions and what's really important to us, and committing to that new place.
Great, excellent.
Yeah. Integration is the next piece, and that's really becoming comfortable with the new and saying, right, this is it, this is the change, this is the new normal for me. What's really interesting though, of course, I land the job, I'm feeling really well integrated, I'm saying to all my friends and family, this is great, I'm working at company XYZ and this is a wonderful job, everything I've always wanted. On my first day, what do you think of the emotions I'm feeling are?
Right back at the beginning.
Absolutely, absolutely. So by being able to hack this methodology and being aware of it, we can set ourselves up for success.
Great.
Because we can predict all of these emotions we'll be feeling.
So we've covered a lot of really important content for the emotional experience of a job seeker. So Liz, what are your top couple of tips to manage this sort of experience?
Oh goodness, Taz. So I think probably the number one tip is about tuning into those emotions. It's so critical. And I always say to people that I'm working with, journal, journal, journal. You need to be writing stuff down every day, even if it's just a couple of sentences, so that you can actually check in with what's going on. Sometimes it's much easier to see it from the outside looking in.
Now, I have to admit, I can relate to that on many dimensions. Throughout my career and my life, I've gone through phases of journaling, and every time I do it, I get immense value from it. It's often very hard to get yourself to do it in the first place.
Absolutely. And I think with journaling, it can just be drawing a smiley face. It could be as simple as that, but just making that conscious choice to check in on your emotions so that you can navigate what's going on in your environment appropriately. And I think the other really good tip I have for people is around hacking your happiness chemicals. And I think that's something that we're going to be talking about a little bit later on.
My kind of topic, well and truly. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Liz. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been great.
And for you in the audience, stay tuned for the next segment where we get stuck into how to hack your happiness chemicals. It'll be a fascinating segment.